Malo Lele, and I would like to welcome you all to the second part of the series on Sydney Realism to Atenisi University and Lo'auanism in Tonga. In other words, it's about the philosophy of Sydney Realism and how it's connected to Atenisi University and Lo'auanism in the Kingdom of Tonga. I hope you are all well, and I also hope that the first part of this series was enough for you all, for some general information, overall outlook about the distinction and relation between Sydney Realism, Atenisi University, and Lo'auanism or Lo'au University. And with the first part, I didn't provide any detailed information, which I'm going to do in this part too. But I just threw out to you who are watching from different countries, different universities, different academic institutions, my overall outlook or overall view about the distinction and the relation of the philosophy of Sydney Realism, Atenisi University, and also Lo'au University. And I mentioned two main topics, which throughout and through, I will try my best to link every issues into these two main topics, which is the philosophy of Sydney Realism, educational, social, and all the philosophies of Sydney Realism, Professor John Anderson in the Sydney Realism, beginning from his philosophy about metaphysics or ontology. And I'll try my best to connect it to Atenisi University and Lo'au University. Also, I will talk about the intellectual genealogy or genealogist among scholars between these three universities or academic movements, which will be the main focus of this part two today. I will focus on the intellectual genealogies of Anderson, Professor John Anderson, and some historical background, and his teachers, the Hegelian philosophers in Scotland, in Glasgow, and also in other parts of Scotland, and also his link or his connection to some of his early students, former students, when he was started, in his earliest career, academic career at Sydney University. We'll see how we go, but I think today mainly I will focus on that. On the intellectual genealogy of John Anderson. But before proceeding on, I would like to respond here to a question by one of our Lo'auan students. He's a renowned artist and also working towards starting his PhD in Lo'au University, named Siosiua, Siosiua, or Lo'au Asau in our lineage ceremonial names, or traditional ceremonial names. So Siosiua, last week after my first video, or part 1, he asked about how can for me to connect the Sydney Realism to Atenisi Realism, to Lo'auanism, and also to some of what he called the philosophies. He used the term philosophy, philosophies of our ancient Tongan ancestors, or Tongan Lo'auans, the Lo'au lineage in the past, which was our main intellectual movement in the kingdom during the Tonga Empire, from the 9th century after Christ until the 17th, 18th century. So, firstly, first part of my response to Siosiua, Sydney Realism, Atenisi University, and Lo'auanism, and the philosophy that I've been talking about, which connects the three, that philosophy is the Greek and the Western sense. It's about the Greek and the Western sense of the term. It's about the discipline, philosophy as a discipline of study. So I'm talking about philosophy as a discipline of study, and fundamental conception of that philosophy within the academic circles, within the universities, or these three movements. They are within the basis of universities inquiry, with the methodologies of philosophy, logic, science, and Lavana, in this case, of a social genetic thinking. So, secondly, or the second part of your question is, how can I connect those three, or link them to the philosophies of our Tongan or Moanan ancestors? So philosophy in that sense, for me, you are asking about the notion of worldview, how our ancestors perceived different social important factors, or natural important factors, or political or cultural important factors from their own perspective, which is they were within society, except in the case of Lo'au or Lo'au lineage, they were in Mananga, in their residence at the district of Hamea, and they were more like scientists and philosophers in ancient. I'm talking about the case of Tonga in particular. So they were more like philosophers, or makalo, sukos in the word of Aristotle. Not really philosophers, not really politicians, but they were more like statesmen. Eh? So that's the nature, or the main role of the Lo'au. They were more like makola sukas, or statesmen. Eh? So, or scientists to some extent, or philosophers. So, but accept them. Apart from them, the other social groups and movements in Tongan society, I'm talking about Tongan society in particular, there were people of different professions who were doing their own works and looking for some ideas or some excuse me, or some conceptual outlooks to direct their practical work. So and that's where the word worldview or there's a German word which I forget. I will come back when I remember that word. That it means worldview, and there have been some studies on that. But to be short, Mr. CEO, what you ask about is you ask about different worldviews outside from the academic circles of Sydney Realism, Atenisi University and Lo'auanism University, with philosophy, firstly as a discipline, and secondly, philosophy is that is being used like a conceptual outlook for researchers in philosophy and in other fields of study for them to find out about how things exist ontologically, cosmologically speaking, where they come from, how they come to being, and the nature or the characters or characteristics of their existence. It's about their existence. That's the second sense of philosophy, is to find out about how things do exist. The first sense is philosophy as a discipline. In the worldviews of our ancestors, and you are free to use some people use the word philosophy or philosophia in Greek. You can use philosophy, but for me it's worldview, because the main difference lies in the aim. With philosophy of Sydney Realism, Atenisi and Lo'auanism is a discipline. Secondly, philosophy is the attempt to find out about the existence, how things exist, independently from whether we know them or not. With worldviews, which you use the word philosophy for, with worldview, they are worldviews or worldview. They are conceptual outlook by people in different professions, not for how they do, not to find out how they do exist, not as a discipline of study, but to find out more information and knowledge and wisdom from those particular worldview in relation to how they could help and pack them up to achieve what they were looking for in utilitarians and considerations, for something for their own survival, for their own interest. It's about the question of what things ought to be or what should be, not the question of philosophy in the sense I mentioned before, to ask about what is the nature, the characteristics of existence or things in themselves. I think I have enough there. We have more 15 minutes for me to try and come to try and share with you the intellectual genealogy or genealogies within the life of Professor John Anderson of the Sydney Realism. And I'll just highlight a few points. Firstly, John Anderson was born in Stonehouse in the southwest of Glasgow in Scotland in 1893. And in 1911, he went to Glasgow University. So he was a product originally of Glasgow University from 1911 until 1917. 1917 to 1922, he worked at the University of Glasgow. So he studied there and then continued from 17 to 1922. He worked there and also in the University of Wales. John Anderson, before he was employed at the Edinburgh University from 1922 to 1926. In 1927, he was still in Scotland in Edinburgh University. From 92 to 92, from 22 to 26, 1926. 1927, he was appointed as a professor, a philosopher at Sydney University, from here, from Sydney, not from Canberra, from Sydney. Interestingly, while he was still in Edinburgh University, he was appointed as a professor of philosophy at Sydney University in 1927. So I mentioned 27 or 26 that he moved from, in the first part that he moved here from Scotland to here, but I'm giving you the details in this part too. And at the same time, 1927, he was appointed as a chair, Charlie Chair of Philosophy at the Department of Charlie's Chair at the Department of Sydney as well, while he was still in Scotland. You see how important John Anderson for Sydney University, the Department of Philosophy at the time. So Charlie's Chair Philosophy is an honorary or an honorable position that was given to a unique and original thinker with unique knowledge or new knowledge to contribute to philosophy in whatever way it may be. Yeah? So here we have John Anderson, Professor John Anderson, with that gift and that award. Yeah? So while he was at Glasgow University, he finished his master in 1917. Yeah? He didn't do his PhD. He was he did only his master, and his master thesis was on William James. William James from the United States of America. He was at the time a philosopher and literary scholar. He was one of the realists in America. So John Anderson, though he was studying under the the Hegelians within Hegelianism that I will come to later. But he was, while studying, he was very impressed by the works, the realist works of William James, or his works on realism. Here we come to the term realism, the doctrine, which Anderson School was named after, Sydney Realism. He wrote his master on the realism of William James. So slowly he was influenced after his master by the doctrine of realism. And I am outlining in general the definition and explanation about realism in my first part, but I will come back to it in the realism in general and in the sense of the Sydney Realism and Professor John Anderson. So in 1911, he finished his master at Glasgow University in 1918. An Australian-born scholar named Samuel Alexander, a philosopher, he was in Glasgow, and he delivered his Clifford. That's the title of his lecture, Clifford Lecture by philosopher or Professor Samuel Alexander. He delivered in Glasgow, and it happened that John Anderson, just after finishing his master, was there. He attended, and he was very touched and influenced by Sam Alexander's talk on the topic space, time, and deity. And then he published his book later, Sam Alexander, with the title Space, Time, and Deity. And that book and his work on space and time and deity did influence profoundly John Anderson in his academic life here in Australia, and also in his theory of space, time, and the categories, which I will come into it later in this series. We go back to John Anderson when he was still in Scotland, before we moved to when he moved here in 1927. In 1919, he married Jenny Bailey, and they later had a son named Alexander. Maybe he was named after Samuel Alexander. It's a reflection how deep the influence of Samuel Alexander on John Anderson. Alexander the son was known Sandy Anderson, and I met Sandy Anderson when I was at the University of Sydney from 1993 until 1997. But there are a lot of stories about that when I was at Sydney University that I will share with you, because I worked together and tried to revive certain moments of the Sydney Realism with some of the Andersons, including one prominent student of Professor John Anderson, Jim Baker, who was in the same generation under at Sydney Uni or Sydney Realism with Professor Futahelu and Professor Max Remoti that I mentioned to you. But coming back to 19, John Anderson married Jenny Bailey, okay? And 1920, he became at the Edinburgh University. John Anderson became a lecturer on realism, 1920. because he was there from 1920 at Edinburgh University to 1926, then moved with Jenny and Sandy or Alexander to Sydney to take the professor of philosophy and also the Charles Chair of philosophy that I mentioned before. So he was a lecturer on realism and also metaphysics while he was at Edinburgh University from 22 to 26. At the departments of Cam Smith Department of Logic and Metaphysics. In 1926, he was very disappointed and dispirited, for the Edinburgh University rejection or the rejecting of his new book on logic based on realism. And when we come to this, I would like to talk about his teachers and mentor. They were all Hegelians. Under the Christian idealism, the Hegelians at the University of Edinburgh and also in Scotland and also at University of Glasgow and University of Wales. Those Hegelians, they were under the so-called the Scottish Hegelianism. They were known as Christian idealism. And I'll just quickly talk about Hegel and maybe Kant as well, Immanuel Kant and George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. Immanuel Kant was before. They were both from from Prussia, from Germany. But Kant, the first philosopher to embark on from rationalism with his doctrine of transcendental idealism, and Hegel was influenced by Kant with the emphasis on idealism, and as it is shown among the with in the name of the Hegelianism in Scotland, where John Anderson was brought up and was being influenced. It was known as Christian Hegelianism or Christian idealism. So John Anderson was studying among the Hegelians, the Christian Hegelians, with their Hegelian Christian idealism, with their Christian idealism. And Hegel, with his emphasis that history and everything is based and determined and predetermined by ideas or by the spirit with a capital S, an idea with the capital I. Hegel expounded. He learned from classical Greek scholars about the concept of dialecticism, which started by Heraclitus. Socrates, his method of investigation was known also as dialectic method of Socrates. So Hegel developed the idea of dialectic of the spirit, dialectic of the spirit of the ideas. And as I said, it was about non-material, about the spirit, about the ideas that direct history and everything in the universe and in society. Nature, universe, and society. And Hiko was talking about in every epoch or every era, there is always a thesis. Thesis in singular or thesis in plural. And that thesis will be encountered or will face another new or idea or opposed idea, which is antithesis. And the interaction of thesis and antithesis gives way to synthesis. Okay? And then society and history and thinking, how we think, all evolved in this dialectic way. Okay? Idea or ideas, antithesis, and then synthesis, the outcome of the combination or interaction or dialectic between the thesis and. But all come down to ideas or idea or the spirit, the determining factor of history and human society and nature and the universe is the power of ideas, the powers of the spirit. That what Hiko was trying to unveil it, but I will come back to that. Our time now is almost finished. I would like to wind up, and we will continue with the intellectual genealogy of Anderson in part 3 of this series. I would like to finish up with the teachers and mentor of John Anderson, the Hegelians, his Hegelian teachers. So there were a few people who influenced him, like the brothers Edward and John Kerr, and his mentor at the Classical University was Henry Jones. Henry Jones. Also, he was influenced also by Robert Adamson and John Bennett. I will talk more about John Bennett because he influenced. John Anderson used him a lot. But they were also Robert Adamson and John Bennett. They influenced him as well. But and there were a few others, but I think I'll come back to that in the next part of the series. But I'll stop there. I'll quit there, and thank you very much for listening, and see you next time.